a few housekeeping items to share with you. So this session is going to include 2 mini presentations. Each session is going to run for 15 minutes and then with a 5-minute Q&A. We ask that you keep your microphone on mute until you need to ask a question. You can ask your questions at any time by entering them into the chat panel. We will be saving all questions until the end of each presentation. If there is time after both presentations, then we will open the floor for more Q&A. After this session, please take a moment to provide feedback to each of our session presenters by filling out their respective evaluation forms. They are located in the conference portal. So our first presentation is Cutting Through COVID-19 Communications Overload, which emails engaged personal librarian students. And your presenters are Laura Birkenhauer and Nate Floyd. So take it away.
All right. So welcome everyone to our mini presentation, Cutting Through COVID-19 Communications Overload, which emails engage personal librarian students. So presenters today are myself, Laura Birkenhauer, and Nate Floyd. We are both student success librarians for the Miami University Libraries in Oxford, Ohio. So I was interested in this topic just because there seemed to be a lot of conversation around engaging students during the pandemic. The assumption I was hearing and reading about seemed to be that college students were just totally checked out during this time. So I was curious to take a look in particular and see if students in our personal librarian program were in fact less engaged than usual. And if that was the case and they were less engaged, I wondered what kind of content we had shared had still managed to draw their attention. And I also wondered, based on what we found, if there were any takeaways that could be applied long-term to improve engagement in future messaging. So we'll spend the next 15 minutes getting into these questions, discussing first the personal librarian program itself. Next, the process of actually gathering data about student engagement with the program during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then our findings and takeaways. So I'm going to turn it over first to Nate, and he's going to start our talk by giving an overview of the personal librarian program.
So the goal of the personal librarian program is to personally connect students to library services. The program matches students with librarians, and librarians then connect with those students via email. The program began at Miami in 2014 with Gmail messages, but now we use a commercial email marketing software program. We had 20 librarians participating in the program in 2020 and 2021. In a typical year, we send about 20 messages to students. We do more messages in the fall and less messages in the spring. But in 2020, our supervisor requested that we do more personal librarian messages in the spring 2021 semester. And again, as Laura said, this was due to this perceived lack of engagement during the fall. So who are we communicating with? Well, the personal librarian program includes all first year and transition students. We get contact information, Laura and I do, we get contact information for the new students from our Division of Enrollment Management and Student Success. We also get information about their declared majors, their enrollment and first year experience courses, and information about student populations they belong to, such as honor students, international students, military affiliated students, and so on. So with that information, we enroll new students into the personal librarian program. Laura and I take about half of the students, and the rest are then assigned to subject specialist librarians based on the student's enrollment in subject specific first year experience courses. Now that's kind of a mouthful, let me give you an example. So students who are majoring in business would be enrolled in a first year experience course called Business 106. And so the business librarians would be assigned to those students. So in terms of numbers, in 2019 and 2020, we had 4,674 students participating. And in 2020 and 2021, we had 4,844 students. And so here are just a few screenshots here to the right of from some of our messages. We promote special library events and services, and we're really just trying to make students aware of what the library can do for them. So we use the Emma email marketing software program. Some of the pros to this program are that you can easily recycle messages, you can track open rates and click counts. One of the downsides to this program, though, is it does not track replies. So when a student gets a message and just hits the reply button to contact their librarian, we don't get the data on that reply. So that's really up to the librarians reporting their contacts with students. So that can get a little bit tricky across 20 librarians and close to 5,000 students. But nevertheless, the Emma email marketing software program does make it possible for us to gather lots of other really good data. And that's really what we use to design this project. So we recorded open rates for all messages sent in 2019 and 2021. And we recorded all click counts for the messages sent in 2020 and 2021. Laura and I collaborated in Google Sheets, and we recorded all of this data. In total, we looked at 51 messages sent by 20 librarians, and we reviewed over 1,000 individual messages. So before we share our findings from the data, I think it's important to have some context for what was happening at Miami during the 2020-2021 school year in terms of the shift to remote learning and living. So on March 11, 2020, Miami moved its classes online, and the plan was we'd be resuming face-to-face classes on April 12th. But on March 20th, the residence halls closed, and we found out we would not be back on campus for the rest of the semester. In late summer, we found out we'd begin the school year early with all classes online. We had a phased-in approach at Miami, so classes began online a week early. Residence halls opened on September 14th, 2020, during week 5 of the fall semester, and face-to-face classes resumed on September 21st, 2020, during week 6 of the fall semester. And so now Laura is going to talk to you about what we found when we looked at student engagement with our personal librarian messages.
All right, so what did we find when we looked at the data in Emma? So I wanted to start with what was the question that was really the biggest question on my mind. Were our students actually less engaged during this time? Because that was the assumption, right? That's what we were hearing. So in short, the answer was yes. So a look at the fall 2019 open rates compared to fall 2020 shows that engagement was definitely down. There was a 10% difference in the open rates on our first message of the semester. So only 74% of students opened it in 2020. And so as a point of comparison, Emma reported in September that the average open rate for universities was only 34% in 2020. So we had 74%, their average for Emma was 34%. So although we're doing a pretty fantastic job compared to those averages, it's pretty noteworthy that overall we saw a drop in our students' engagement. So once I knew for sure that yes, students weren't quite as engaged, I wanted to know what was getting through to them. So I was really curious about what attracted attention when the shift to virtual learning first happened. So I took a look at the 2 messages that were sent to personal librarian students after the university closed residence halls and moved all of the courses online. So here's that first message. And so you can see not only did it have a really low open rate, but it was actually the second lowest total click count of all messages reviewed in 2020, 2021. We do know at that time, of course, students were busy navigating that shift to remote learning. They were moving off campus. Their inboxes were just inundated by professors, the university, anyone they'd ever contacted and communicated with, they were getting messages. Students who did click, they were navigating to the library's homepage, they were using the proxy link and reviewing the COVID-19 resources shared. But again, there was very little engagement with this message. The next message sent bounced back in a big way. The average open rate increased by 10% and 34 total clicks were counted. So students were clicking to access free news resources, the newly created COVID-19 resources LibGuide, and to learn about things that they could do while isolating. Now, beyond just reviewing those first messages, I wanted to actually look for trends in all of the messaging sent during the pandemic. Open rates were collected by week of the semester, and I also looked for trends in the language used in the subject lines of the most open messages. And then along with gathering total click counts for each link, we also noted which section the link was in within the email, what kind of content the link directed to, and how the link was presented, either as a plain URL, linked text or an image, a button, an embedded video. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is just quickly talk about some of the specifics of what I found, and I'll share some of our overall takeaways. One of the first trends noticed was that open rates were strongest during those first few weeks of the semester, and this trend was also true of 2019. It was good to see that students were still reading our messages even before they actually moved back into dorms in week 5. And then looking at the top 10 most open messages, this is just a word cloud of the words used in subject lines of these messages. So the bigger the word, the more often it was used. And you'll notice that welcome was the most mentioned word. This seemed particularly meaningful and stood out to me because welcoming is one of our library's values. Now, what kind of content were students clicking to access? So here and over the next few slides, I'll be discussing the top 25 most clicked links. Since we don't have time to go through all of those popular links one by one in a short presentation like this, we're offering the option to access that full list later. So here's the content from the top 5. Students wanted to learn how to check out Adobe Creative Cloud online, subscribe to the New York Times even while off campus, and attend a virtual library event for first-year students. These were the things they were clicking on in big numbers. Now, what about the kinds of things that got the most clicks? Of the top 25 links, 4 were to information about library events and 4 were to LibGuides. So you can also see that some of the other popular content included links to other areas of the university, library databases, software, videos, a few external links to resources about test anxiety and taking online exams were also popular. And so next, I wondered a lot about the way links were presented in our messaging, assuming that things like graphics or buttons were going to get a little bit more attention. But it turned out that most of the top 25 links were actually just plain old URLs. Linked text, images, and embedded video only made up a small portion of those links. Now, finally, where was it most impactful to place links? It turns out the top of the email and the first 2 sections of text, that's the place to include content if you want clicks. Okay, so now that I've really quickly gone through just a few of the specifics of the findings, let's talk overall takeaways. What did we learn? What lessons can we apply long-term to encourage engagement? So number 1, we learned that even in a pandemic, continuing to message out relevant information re-engaged students who at first checked out thanks to everything that was going on with COVID. To continue to engage students, we need to be consistent with our messaging, but allow for flexibility in our content just to make sure what we're sending is actually timely. Along with that, now that we have a list of the most popular links from the last year, we can maximize our use of that content in future messaging. We now know that overall links to library events and LibGuides, along with links to content from other parts of the university, are popular even in a pandemic. We can also make sure we're placing popular content at the top of the message where it's most likely to be seen. Next, the data confirm that we're playing a huge role in welcoming new students to the university, and we need to take advantage of that. Students are reading our messaging and reading it in those first few weeks of the semester. even while living off campus, attending classes remotely. So let's include our most important information in those messages in the future, and also use those messages as a place to make sure students feel welcome and like they belong on campus. Now, finally, this process has been tedious, but it's allowed us to gather valuable information. So assessments like this should definitely be repeated, right? I'm interested in not only making changes based on what the data tells us, but also just experimenting with some other ways that we can continue to improve that engagement. So that was a quick presentation, but thank you so much for attending. You can take a look at more of the data by visiting the link on this slide, and we're ready to take your questions now.
Okay, it looks like we have a question. Will you continue the increased rate of messaging in semester 2, or will you go back to the reduced outreach schedule?
I think that's something that we need to think about. But just the fact that, we have so many students who are going to be in their second year who, weren't on campus connecting to these resources, I think that they may become part of the program, and maybe we need to kind of continue to do this increased messaging for the near future, just to make sure everybody is aware of, the services that we're offering. But I think it's something that we need to discuss. Is it sustainable? It was a lot of work. I think Nate and I put a lot of work into it, but at the same time, if we do it for another year and we kind of get it down, it can become a little less work moving forward. We can recycle some of that content like we talked about.
Okay, the next question I have is, do you have any data on if the same students always open the messages or if different students clicked on different messages?
That was not something we looked at, but Emma does allow you to take a look at that information. I can say just anecdotally, it looked like I was seeing different email addresses when we were gathering the data, but I did not compile that information. I don't know if Nate has anything to add to that.
So Emma does, you can sort of track individual sort of engagement, but I think one thing that maybe gets at the next level of that question is, because students are sorted into these different categories by their major, we can see like which messages got more attention depending on the major. So maybe we were sharing workshops or resources that English students were very, very interested in. And so maybe we saw more engagement there and maybe less with engineering, and then that relationship would be reversed in some messages. So it is kind of interesting to see how engagement varies according to the student majors.
Okay, and then I have, do you have any insights about what students asked when they replied to the personal librarians?
So we, like Nate kind of talked about, we don't have all of that reply information. It just kind of depends on the librarian. I think both of us, though, can speak to the replies that we're personally getting. So I'm not sure if they're asking just about this year. I will say this year, replies have been down. I haven't heard a lot from my personal librarian students. In the past, it would be things like, can you help me find my textbooks? Or what events are happening at the library in the first week? Or I missed that workshop. Can you meet with me and go over the content? Just kind of those typical things. Usually it just kind of feels like they see a message and they realize, oh, hey, the library is like still a thing. Maybe I should reach out and get some help, or even just like click on over to the library's website. We saw some of that happening with our messages.
Excellent. We have time for one more question. If somebody wanted to unmute their mic and ask, I'll give you a second.
Heather, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Since you found out that most of the clicks were at the top of the message, have you thought about doing shorter messages but with more frequency?
I think that's a really great idea. I think we really need to sit down now that we've gathered all of this and talk about what our messages will look like in the future. But it's really clear that things that are at the bottom of the message are being buried a bit. I'm hesitant because I think once a week is probably, the max of what we'd want to do, but I think shorter messages might be the key.